from all of our countries on 3 specific points. First, his goal was to increase funding to humanitarian appeals and international organizations that aid refugees. The second was trying to get greater acceptance of refugees through resettlement and other legal pathways. And thirdly, he sought to increase refugees' self-reliance and inclusion, and that's through education and legal work while in refugee status in other countries. Our purpose in holding this conference, then, is to help show what the U.S. foreign policy is towards this very current issue and show how topics like this are addressed in multilateral fora, like the Model UN, so that you all understand a little bit more our policy, but also get to refine some of your skills and processes in doing a simulation like this. Now, you all understand and are aware of the fact that we've asked you, after this simulation is done, to carry forth your knowledge and share it with other students at your institutions. So I think we expect you'll learn a lot in terms of the content and actually about the crisis itself. We're going to have a great speaker with us in Mexico City to address that, but also different maybe techniques and processes about how simulations are managed. So I think, and of course, this is going to be held in English, so you will all get a chance to practice and refine your English language. I think that is about it for now. I really want to give the time to Adam in order to kind of present about the way that the simulation is going to be held, but also he'll open it up to questions and answers as well towards the end. So if while he's speaking, I highly recommend you start taking notes and save them for the end, and that way we'll try to get all the questions addressed in this session. Okay, Adam, I think I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Can you see my screen? Maybe I can look at the other panelists and they can nod if they can see my screen. And wonderful. Perfect. Okay. So it looks like we're all set. So my name is Adam Porter Price, and I'm the chairman of the board of directors of the International Model United Nations Association. Our organization runs the largest Model United Nations conference in the world, at least the largest one that we know of. And it's in New York City. Part of the conference is held at the United Nations headquarters, the General Assembly headquarters in New York City. And we welcome students from about 50 countries all over the world for 4 days of debate and simulation of many different topics that are facing the United Nations. So I've been doing Model UN for a very long time, I think about 15 years now. It's not my full-time job. There are days that I wish that it were, because I've certainly learned a lot from it. But in my free time, in my day-to-day job, I'm a management consultant. So this is my opportunity for me to stay connected with some of these very important topics and very important skills that I learned when I was a high school student, a secondary school student, and that I really enjoyed when I was a college student and have continued to learn. So what I wanted to do was spend a little bit of time explaining some of these rules, and you probably all received this very long rules of procedure document. I'm going to tell you that you don't need to memorize all of this. It's not necessary. But I will tell you the 7 different things that you need to know to sort of function in committee. Many of you have probably attended a Model United Nations conference before, or maybe have some experience with Model United Nations. So I'd also like to use this opportunity to answer some of your questions and make sure that the rules that you are familiar with are the same. We are using the NISMN rules of procedure, our rules of procedure, because they tend to be very similar to many of the other conferences in the United States and Canada. So if you know these rules, you should be pretty confident in going to any conference in either the United States or Canada and knowing that they're going to be about the same. The Harvard conference, Harvard High School Conference has very similar rules. The conference at the University of Pennsylvania, very similar rules. So, and the Georgetown University Conference, also very similar. So we like to use these because they will be very similar. I think they're a good way for you to sort of establish a base of knowledge about rules. Now, there are 30 rules here, right? 30 or 40 rules. Most of them are not very important during the actual committee. In the actual committee, you're going to spend most of your time in a formal or an informal debate, and we'll talk in a minute about what that means. But these rules are necessary for the very beginning of the committee and the very end of the committee, really, when voting happens on the ultimate product, the ultimate document that your committee will produce, which is typically called a resolution. So I bring these rules up, but I'm going to show you a document here that will sort of explain how the committee typically works. And this doesn't include all of the rules. This is just a very, very typical timeline. So if you see on the left side of the page, let me maybe make this full screen. So on the left side of this page is the very beginning of the committee. And that's when all of the delegates gather in the room, and the chair, the speaker, will call the roll of countries. And countries will be expected to say that they are present. There are some countries that say they are present and voting, and I will explain in a minute what that means, but it's not important. The most common thing to say is present. And you need to say that in order to be counted. So the chair will use that, the count of countries that say they are present to understand how many students, how many delegates are in the room, and how many votes are needed to pass any motions. After we know how many delegates are in the room and we've established the number of votes that need to be counted in order to pass a motion, we will set the speaking time. And this is a formality that allows the speaker's list, formal debate, to be opened. So everyone, when you debate, as you probably know, you are limited to the amount of time you can talk for. And the chairperson, the director of the committee, will track the amount of time that every delegate is speaking for and stop them when they have used all of their time. So they'll set the speaking time. You can change the speaking time at any point during the debate. You can make a motion to change the speaking time, but something like 2 minutes is pretty typical. There are some advantages to having a longer speaking time and some advantages to having a shorter speaking time. Typically, as the committee moves along and as you have more substantial, much more to discuss when you are talking to the committee, you may want more time. You may want a lot more time to explain yourself, maybe read a speech that you've written, but that's the long speaking time is designed for really explaining your ideas. Sometimes you want a short speaking time and you want all of the different speakers to speak very quickly. And that allows the committee to have many speakers talk in a very short period of time. So there's no real rule about it. You can change it, but you should know that once you set the speaker's time, it will be like that for a little while. It will be like that for several minutes, even maybe 30 minutes or an hour. Okay, so we've figured out how many delegates are in the room, right? We know how many delegates are present, and we've set a speaking time. Now we'll be in debate, and you will spend most of the committee session in debate. Now, there are 3 different types of debate. You'll see it here in these 3 boxes on the screen. Formal debate, moderated caucus, and unmoderated caucus. Let me explain the difference between those 3. Formal debate is what the committee goes back to if anything stops. If there's ever a motion and it fails, if when you come back from lunch, if you do anything, committee always starts in formal debate. And in formal debate, there is a list of speakers, as you probably know. And in order, the committee chair will allow each speaker to speak. So if the speaker's time is 2 minutes, and there are 5 countries on the speakers list, they will start with the first country, and then after they've spoken for 2 minutes, go on to the second country, and then go on to the third country, and the fourth country, and the fifth country. Most of the time, the speakers list is very long, so there may be 20 or 30 countries that are on the speakers list, and the job of the chairperson is to keep moving through the committee and letting every person that's on the list talk for 2 minutes. Now, at any time, someone may want, a delegate may want to introduce a different type of debate that would allow the committee to either speed up and speak, have a delegate speak to the entire committee very quickly, or they may want to basically stop committee, to suspend the rules of committee and allow the delegates to get out of their seats and go talk to each other. And this is where a lot of the real work in committee is done. And that's why we have the moderated caucus and the unmoderated caucus. So let me start with the moderated caucus. The purpose of a moderated caucus is to speed up the speakers list. So if someone makes a motion for a moderated caucus, they will propose a short period of time where we will stop using the formal process, we'll stop using the formal debate, and we will pause where we are on the speakers list. So if there were 5 countries on the speakers list and 2 have already spoken, we would stop before we went to the third. We would take a break before we went to the third country, and we would temporarily go into a moderated caucus. And in a moderated caucus, for instance, in a 5-minute moderated caucus where everyone who wants to speak is allowed to speak for 30 seconds, you would be able to, instead of taking 2 minutes and allowing one delegate to speak and then 2 minutes, in 30 seconds you could get a delegate and then 30 seconds another delegate. Do you understand? So you can really answer a very simple question. You can get a lot of different countries to provide input to a question in a short period of time. So this can sometimes be very useful. The other thing you can do is use an unmoderated caucus, and delegates will use this a lot, particularly later on in the committee, as many ideas have been shared through the formal debate process, where after many countries have stood up and read speeches that they may have prepared already, where they really explain their policy positions and the things that they would like the eventual resolution of the committee to make, you might want to use an unmoderated caucus. So if you remember before where I said, what happens if there are 5 countries in the speakers list and 2 of them have spoken, before the third one speaks, a delegate might make a motion to have a 10-minute unmoderated caucus. And then typically the chairperson would say, okay, we will vote on that. And all of the delegates would get to vote. And if it passes, if that motion passes, you would be able to stand up, walk around, talk to other delegates for 10 minutes before you would have to sit down, and we go back to formal debate. Formal debate resumes. So those are the 3 different types of debate, and you don't need to worry about remembering them all now, but we will be, because we'll repeat this during the session, we'll make sure that you understand when we're switching from formal debate to moderated caucus or unmoderated caucus. But these are 3 different tools that delegates can use to change how fast the committee is moving, and also to change the way that you are able to talk to other delegates. So the strictest, the most formal, the most diplomatic is through the formal debate process. The fastest and least formal is the unmoderated caucus. Okay, so that was a brief introduction to the different types of debate, and we will have time later on to answer questions about that if you like. But after debate is over, there will be some cleanup to finish the committee. And after you've spent a very long time in debate, you will probably introduce a draft resolution. And a resolution, as you probably know, is a document that sort of summarizes or explains what the committee as a whole agrees to. And while debate is happening, you will be working with your fellow delegates to try to develop resolutions that a majority of the committee can agree with. As you get to the later end of the committee, and you'll see this on the right side of the page, you will introduce resolutions that the entire committee will discuss and eventually vote on. You may choose to amend the resolution. So if you don't like, if a resolution is maybe 2 or 3 pages long and you don't disagree with all of it, but there is 1 or 2 pieces of it that you disagree with, and you think many other countries will disagree with as well, you can propose a change of just a small section of the resolution, and that's called an amendment. And then finally, at the end of the committee, you would move to close debate and move to voting procedure. And at this point, there is a very formal process of reviewing all of the resolutions that have been proposed to the committee and voting on them. And you don't need to worry about the rules for that right now. The committee chair will explain those to you when that is happening. But you should know that there is basically a lot of formality at the beginning of a committee and a lot of formality at the end of a committee. Okay, so this is just an example of the timeline. We will explain this again as we sort of do the committee session, but that's sort of what you should know. I'm going to tell you 4 other things that you need to know about. One of them is about making a motion. So after every speaker during formal debate, you have the opportunity to make a point or a motion. I'll explain what a point is in a minute. But a motion is basically a proposal that the committee does something. And just about all the time when you make a motion, when you propose something, you would use this very formal way of proposing that, right? So I would move for a 10-minute unmoderated caucus, or I move to suspend the session to go to lunch. Any of these things that have to do with the management of committee, you would formally propose this. You would raise your placard, which is a piece of cardboard that has the name of your country written on it, or a piece of paper that has the name of your country written on it. The chair would recognize you, would call on you and say that they want to know what you have to say, and then you would propose your motion. So you would say, I move to whatever, or I move for whatever. And you use this as a method of proposing anything in committee. Don't worry if you don't get it right the first time. It's very, very common. Even delegates that have been doing Model United Nations for a long time sometimes make mistakes. And the point of the chair is to help you understand what you need to do to propose the type of thing that you are trying to accomplish in the committee. Okay, I'm gonna move on from this, but I can come back later if anyone has questions during our question and answer session. Because I need to explain one other set of things, and these are the other 3 things you need to know. So I mentioned that the chair will ask after every speaker if there are any points or motions, and we explained what a motion is. There are 3 different types of points, and these are other methods that you use to get questions answered, or make sure that the committee is running effectively, or to make sure that you are able to fully participate in the committee. So there are 3 types of points: a point of order, a point of parliamentary inquiry, and a point of personal privilege. And I'll explain these a little bit. A point of order is what you would raise if you think something has gone wrong in committee, if you think a rule has been violated, if maybe the speakers list, there were 5 speakers on the speakers list, and 3 of them spoke, and then the chair accidentally called on the 5th person, the 5th delegate, rather than calling on the 4th person. Just a mistake, not a big deal. But if that were to happen, you would raise your placard, and say, point of order, Honorable Chair, I believe we should be recognizing the delegate from Ireland instead of the delegate from Austria. Very, very typical. I don't find that people tend to use this point very often, but it's worth knowing that you can use it if you believe that there has been an error in running committee. These other 2 points, point of parliamentary inquiry and point of personal privilege, are used a lot, and you really need to know them. So a point of parliamentary inquiry is what you can use anytime you don't understand what type of, what you should do with rules. So anytime you have a question about the rules, this is your way to ask the chair a clarifying question, and the chair will be very, very easy to work with. I don't know if anyone has ever attended the MUN conference in New York, but delegates use the point of parliamentary inquiry. Even very experienced delegates use this all the time to ask the chair a question about how to do something in committee. So if you wanted to understand maybe how to make a certain type of motion, or you wanted to propose a caucus, but you didn't know which one to propose, a moderated caucus or an unmoderated caucus, what I would recommend you do is raise your placard, wait for the chair to call on you because you can't interrupt another delegate with this motion, but raise your placard, wait for the chair to call on you and say, point of parliamentary inquiry, I don't know how to make the motion to break for lunch right now, or something like that. And then the chair will use this opportunity to explain to you how you would do that. Not just you, but all of the other delegates, because the chances are pretty good that if you have a question, many other delegates have that same question. Okay. Finally, there's the point of personal privilege. And you would use this point anytime that something is happening in the room that is preventing you from fully participating in the conference. So if it's too hot in the room, if you can't hear the speaker, because people are talking and it's too noisy, if you're being stung by bees, if there's anything happening that prevents you from fully participating in the conference. What is most common is a delegate may raise their placard, wait for the chair to call on them, and they'll say, point of personal privilege, I can't hear the delegate that's speaking at the front of the room. Very, very common, happens all the time. So to recap, to explain again, you need to know 7 things to effectively participate in committee. You need to know the point of order, point of parliamentary inquiry, and point of personal privilege. These are sort of your special tools that help you when you think something is going wrong. You need to know how to make a motion, and we will practice this in committee probably, just so you get used to it. So that's the 4th thing. And then the 5th, 6th, and 7th things are the different types of debate: formal debate, moderated caucus, and unmoderated caucus. And I promise you, if you can learn those 7 things, the rest of the rules are pretty easy. You will pick them up as they go along because you don't use them nearly that often. And the chair will be very helpful in explaining which part of the rules you need to know at each time. They will help you through that. Even in, like I said, and I don't mean to repeat this over and over, but even in the very, very sophisticated, very complicated conferences where there are expert delegates, the chair regularly spends time explaining the rules and takes the time. So don't feel bad if you don't know all the rules. It's not a thing you have to worry about. The other thing that I think is important, and I understand that many of you will be responsible for planning a conference in your own schools, I think. There are many conferences that run according to the rules very, very strictly. And I think that that's in some ways good because it's worth you knowing eventually, as you become a more experienced delegate, it's worth you knowing all of these rules. But I think it also frequently makes people focus on the rules and not focus on the reason why you are there. And the reason you are there is obviously to learn research and writing and conflict negotiation and how to debate, all of these other skills that really have nothing to do with the rules. So I would encourage you to focus less on these specific rules, right? Don't worry about learning all of these different rules. Focus on understanding the policy of the country that you are representing and the types of solution that you think that that country would like to see. Do research on your country and learn what it is like to be in the perspective of that country, because that's really the purpose of Model United Nations. And we will help you with all of the specific rules and things like that. Okay, and like I said, if you can remember, and you'll find these 7 things in the rules that we sent over, but if you can really just understand the difference between formal debate, moderated caucus, unmoderated caucus, how to make a motion, and what the points are and how to use them, you'll be all set. And we will practice these at the beginning of committee so you know how to use them. But those are really the only, if you know those 7 things, you will understand how 95% of the committee time is spent. Great. So I think we have some time to take some questions. Perfect. Paula, how do you want to handle questions here?
I'm going to be telling you, I've grouped some of the questions. Some are very general, some are specific, so I'll tell you. Well, there's one question that I think it's something that happens here in Mexico very common, and it's about the language, if they can use the first person when they're participating in the debate.
That is a very good question. So if I understand correctly, we are saying when they are making a debate, when they are speaking in formal debate, and you are recognized. Let's say you are representing Ireland in the debate, and you've been recognized to speak for 2 minutes. And you go up, can you speak? Can you say, I believe this, or I propose that? Or should you say, the nation of Ireland or the Republic of Ireland believes? You should always actually speak in the third person. You should speak from the perspective of the country, because you are no longer you. You are no longer representing yourself. I'm no longer Adam when I'm a delegate. I'm representing the Republic of Ireland or the People's Republic of China. So it's okay. When you are making very formal speeches, you should always refer to the country, right? You are now representing the country. That's what I would probably say. Is that similar to the rules that you see a lot, Paula?
Yes, in Mexico, definitely that's something. But also, well, what happens here is that they use motions when somebody says I, instead, like I think, and then somebody's motion of personal privilege or something like that, to like kind of accuse them. So that's what.
Oh yeah, you can't do that. Yeah, so that's a good question. So the chair will stop you if you are doing something very personal like that. So if you use the wrong point, if you say, so what happens very frequently is someone will say, point of order, I disagree with the speaker, and that is not appropriate. You can't do that. The chair will stop you if you try to do that, because that is not an appropriate use of a point. A point can only be used for, like we saw on the slides, right? A point can only be used if something has happened incorrectly with the rules, or you can refer to yourself in the first person for a point of parliamentary inquiry. You could say, point of parliamentary inquiry, I don't understand what motion I should use right now. That's okay. You don't have to say the Republic of Ireland does not understand the right motion to use right now. You could. It's not some delegates do that. It's not a big deal if you refer to yourself in the first person for a point of parliamentary inquiry. And for a point of personal privilege, obviously it's referring to you, the person. So you can say a personal privilege, I can't hear. That's okay. But other than that, you should try as much as possible to act not as yourself, but as the country. You are speaking on behalf of the country that you are representing. There are some, and I hate to even go into these because you will almost never use them, but there are some times when when another delegate insults a delegate so much that like it is like a very personal insult, and you can use a rule that allows you to make that point, but I would not even learn that rule. Let the chair manage that, because the chair will understand when a very personal attack has been made and the appropriate rule to take there. I'm not even going to spend time on that rule because you should never have to use it. Most of the time, you should just be able to speak about your country in the third person. It's a very good question, though. Very good question. What other questions did we find, Paula?
There's a question about electronic devices. If the delegates are allowed to have electronic devices inside of the session room?
So I don't know what rules we are using for this session, so you may be able to answer that better than I can, Paula. At most conferences in the United States, you are not allowed to use any electronic devices. And the reason for that is that we don't, particularly at the New York conference, we have students from all over the world, and we don't know that all of the students that are attending our conference are going to have a smartphone or a laptop or something like that. And we don't want to make it unfair so that, you know, some students maybe they don't have a laptop computer that they could use to like write resolutions on. So we try to make it so that everyone is at the same level of technological sophistication. Everybody has access to the same level of technology. So for our conference in New York, that will typically mean that you will write all of your working papers and your draft resolutions on paper. And then the chair will get them, once they are ready, the chair will have them typed by our administrative office. So Paula, you can talk about how you want to do that this weekend, but it's very typical when you go to a conference in the United States, or even, I mean, our organization runs conferences in Europe too. Very, very common around the world to have a technology ban at the conference.
No, I was saying that yes, we're gonna keep most of the conference here in Mexico have an electronic ban as well. So I think we're gonna keep it that way, without electronic devices. Yeah. Okay.
Great.
So I'm gonna go on to another question.
Okay.
There is a specific question about the extension of time in moderated and unmoderated caucus, if they are in order.
Good question. Very good question. So we remember, and I'm very impressed. You guys clearly have been studying the rules, or you know the rules very well. So in a moderated caucus or an unmoderated caucus, what I think I understand the question is let's say you are in a moderated caucus, and it is a 5-minute moderated caucus with a 30-second speaking time. And you get to the end of the 5 minutes and you say, this is great. Actually, this was very productive. I think this was a good use of our moderated caucus. When that caucus ends, you can propose extending for another 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever. And the chair will recognize you and you would vote. And if it passes, the moderated caucus would go on longer. You can do the same thing for an unmoderated caucus. The chair will often be very careful with unmoderated caucus, though, because 10 minutes is a typical length for an unmoderated caucus, and the chair, depending on how much, the chair will be walking around the room while the unmoderated caucus is happening. And if the chair thinks that all of the delegates are using the time effectively and are actually really engaged in the topic and are using the unmoderated caucus to debate and get work done, they will probably let you motion to extend the unmoderated caucus. But it is also not uncommon for the chair to say, I don't know that this caucus was used very effectively. Or they might know that there are some new groups that are forming that really would value, that should have the time to speak to the committee. So the chair might say, the chair might encourage the delegates not to use the unmoderated caucus, not to extend the unmoderated caucus. And typically when that happens, the chair will just explain why they wouldn't recommend it. But it is allowed by the rules. It is allowed. You just, in times like this, I would recommend you listen to the chair and really like understand why the chair might recommend against extending it or for extending it. And I will tell you something, oftentimes the chair will hint to you, will sort of recommend to you what might be a good use of time. When I am the chair, I say things like, because I refer to myself in the third person, right? I would say things like, the chair would look favorably upon a 5-minute unmoderated caucus with a, instead of a 10-minute unmoderated caucus. Delegate, would you like to amend your motion? And basically the chair is saying, maybe you don't need 10 more minutes, but 5 minutes is probably a good use of time, right? So to answer your question, yes, it is acceptable to, when a moderated or unmoderated caucus ends, to propose extending the caucus. Good question.
When you're in the speaker list, what is the maximum amount of time you're allowed to speak? That's another question.
On the speakers list? Yes, that's a very good question.
Yeah.
It all depends on when you set, how long you set the speaker's time for. So you'll remember we have here, right, that very early in the committee we set the speaking time. You are allowed to change the speaking time at any point. So after every speaker, the chair will say, are there any points or motions? And it's not uncommon for someone to make a motion to change the speaker's time. I don't think it's very common to have speaker's time that's more than 4 or 5 minutes. And that even seems pretty long. I think it's most common to see 2 or 3 minute speaking time. One of the rules that we didn't discuss that you should probably know about, it's a less important rule, and you'll learn about it like immediately because you use it a lot. It's called a yield. And the idea behind that, this is rule 24. So on the, I will explain this rather than reading the specific rule. With a yield, when you finish speaking, you can sit down. You can just, if you're on the, during formal debate, if you are recognized to speak for 3 minutes and you stopped after 2 minutes, you're done. You've said everything you wanted to say. You can sit down and you don't need to finish your 1 minute that's left, but you still have 1 minute. And you can either give that time to the chair. Basically, it's the formal method of finishing what you're saying. You can say, I yield my time to the chair, and then you just sit down and the chair absorbs your time. Or you can give whatever time is left over to another delegate if you want. You can, if you are working very closely, you are the Republic of Ireland, and you are working very closely with the People's Republic of China, and you know they want to speak, but they are very far down on the speakers list, and they won't get a chance to speak anytime soon. You could say, after I've spoken for 2 minutes, I yield my remaining minute to the People's Republic of China. And then they would get up and they would be able to speak for the rest of your 1 minute that's left over. Most of the time, I think most delegates just yield any time that they have left over during their formal debate. They'd yield it to the chair and they just sit down. But when the speakers list is very long, or when there is quite a bit of conflict being discussed in the committee, you might see it where delegates will yield any leftover time they have to either a delegate that they agree with that will support their points, or they may yield to a delegate that they don't agree with, so they can have sort of discussion. At some conferences, so I mentioned the yield where you finish speaking, right? Let's say there's 3 minutes speaking time, and you've stopped speaking after 1 minute. You can yield the rest of your time to the chair, or you can yield the rest of your time to another delegate. There are some conferences where you can yield to questions. We don't do that in the rules that we're using. You can't do that. But there are some conferences, and this is kind of like the biggest difference between the NISMN, the New York conference rules, and the Harvard conference rules, because Harvard lets you, if you speak for a minute and then you don't have anything else to say, but you'd like to answer questions from any delegates that want to ask you a question, you can say, I yield the balance of my time to questions. And then for those remaining 2 minutes, any delegate can raise their placard and the chair will call on them, and you will be able to answer any question they have. So sometimes that is useful. Yeah. Good question.
Okay, good. So, well, we have another question about I think there are a couple of questions leading to this, that if the delegates are allowed to bring like questions and printed material to the conference, like if they don't have their iPad.
Yeah, so most delegates bring printed materials, questions. I've even seen it's very common for delegates to write speeches ahead of time, particularly for the early part of debate. So it's very common for delegates to say, you know, I know at the very beginning of the conference, I will probably get an opportunity to get up on the speakers list in formal debate and really explain in 3 minutes or 5 minutes all of the policies of my country related to this topic. It's like a really long speech. And for the very beginning of debate, it's very common for lots of countries to just in a row get up and speak for 3 straight minutes about all of their country's thoughts on that particular topic. So I would definitely recommend bringing pre-written questions, pre-written speeches, some of your printed research maybe. At most conferences, you are not allowed to write pre-written resolutions. Like, you're not allowed to write the solution already and then bring it and like propose it as soon as the committee begins. That's not allowed most of the time. And the reason for that is the conference organizers want you to experience what it's like to have to negotiate with your fellow delegates and sort of debate and negotiate and bargain and all of these things. But it is, at some conferences, it is allowed to write a resolution ahead of time and bring it. And that way you at least have something to discuss with other delegates. You can hand them your draft resolution and ask them to comment on it. And then you use that as the document that people edit or change or add to or anything like that. But yes, you should bring whatever you want to bring on paper. That's a good idea.
Okay. We have several questions. I don't think we're going to have enough time to finish them all, so I'm going to make a last question, and then the rest of the questions we're going to see if you can answer them, and then we can email them to all of them, like in a simple.
Yeah, I'm happy. If you send me them via email, I can write responses to them. I'm happy to.
Perfect. Okay, so one last question. They're asking to explain a little bit further the role of the president or the chair of the committee.
Good question. Okay, so excellent question, and this is a good question to end on. So every committee typically has, at most conferences in the United States and Canada, there are two people that are sitting at the front of the committee. And it depends on the conference. Sometimes they're called the president, sometimes they're called the speaker, or the moderator, or the chairman, or the director. It doesn't matter. At the New York conference, they are called the director and the assistant director. And typically the director, for our conference, the New York conference, the director is a college student, whereas the delegates are all high school students, secondary school students. And the director's job is to facilitate the committee, make sure the rules are followed, but also be a coach and a mentor to the delegates. So they will do everything they can to make sure the delegates understand the rules. They will also often be an expert in the topic that's being discussed. So you can ask them, you don't just have to ask them questions about rules, you can also ask them questions about, you know, the different resolutions on refugees, or anything that's very specific to the topic. At most conferences in the United States, the committee directors will be very, very skilled and very knowledgeable on the actual topics you're discussing. And then the second person, the assistant director, is often a slightly less experienced college student. Maybe they were just a delegate and then they graduated from secondary school and they went to university, and this is their first year in university, and they are learning how to be a director, so they will be following the committee director around and learning how to be a director. But they will also, typically, they will know the rules very well, and they will also not be as expert in the topic, but they will know enough about the topic to answer most questions. We formally refer to the people that are responsible for running the committee as the dais, D-A-I-S. And that is just like you would refer to your country in the third person. The dais is a third person, so it is the entity that is technically managing the committee. At some conferences in the United States, the dais, the president or the chairman or the director or whatever you would call it, the people that are running the committee are elected. There are other delegates who are elected to be the head, the chair. That's not very typical, but it does happen sometimes. In the real United Nations, that's what happens. So a country will be selected to be the president of the General Assembly, and they have a logistical and a administrative role that comes along with that. But we try to not do that. In our high school conferences, it is much simpler to do it this way, much less confusing, and it allows you to actually participate in the conference as a student who did a lot of research and really understands the topic and wants to get the practice. So to summarize, the role of the chair or the dais is to manage the committee and make sure it is running effectively, to answer any of your questions about the rules, and to make sure that if you have technical questions about the topic, you have someone that you can talk to.
Thank you very much, Adam, for tonight. I think we're gonna now pass the microphone to Carlos, who's gonna close
Wonderful.
the webinar. So thank you very much for using
Wonderful.
it, and we'll see everybody on the weekend, on Friday.
Yes, absolutely. Good luck, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So thank you, Adam. Thank you, Paula, and of course all our very motivated delegates that will be participating in the summit next weekend. So I'm so excited to meet you all next Friday here in Mexico City, and of course continue in contact with you to see how you replicate your simulations in your schools after the summit. So I think this is all for now, and have a great night, and see you in a couple of days. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.